The Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the scorched earth, where a woman knelt in the dust, wrists bound with rough rope that cut into her flesh. Her eyes, red-rimmed but dry, she'd long since stopped crying, reflected the orange flames consuming. The only home she'd known for 7 years. The men circled her like vultures, laughing as each cherished possession turned to ash. She didn't beg. Sarah Blackwood had learned that begging only fed their cruelty. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Then came the thunder of hooves cresting the ridge behind her. Homestead? Not the expected reinforcements these men had been waiting for. Dark silhouettes appeared against the setting sun, feathered headdresses and raised weapons creating shadows that stretched long across the valley. The laughter stopped. In the sudden silence, Sarah heard only the crackling of flames and her own heartbeat. The Comanche war cry that followed would change everything. April in Texas should have brought gentle rains and wildflowers, but 1848 had delivered nothing but drought and dust. Sarah Blackwood wiped sweat from her brow with a calloused hand and straightened her aching back. The well was running dry, just like her hopes for this season's crops. At 32, she was still strong, lean and weathered by frontier life, but the strain of working the land alone had carved deep lines around her eyes and mouth. "Come on, Boaz," she murmured to the aging plough horse. "Just one more row." The horse nickered softly, as exhausted as she was. 7 years they'd been a team, ever since Tom had brought the colt home as a surprise. Tom, gone 3 years now, taken by the fever that had swept through the settlements that terrible winter. She'd buried him beneath the oak tree that crowned the small rise behind their cabin, the same place they'd once sat together and dreamed of the orchard they'd plant. Dreams. Sarah didn't indulge in those anymore. The distant sound of approaching riders made her freeze. Visitors were rare this far out, 20 miles from the nearest settlement. The nearest neighbors, the Prestons, had abandoned their claim last autumn after the drought began. Sarah reached for the rifle she kept slung across her back whenever. She worked the fields. 5 riders appeared on the road, silhouetted against the harsh sunlight. Not military. Their posture was too loose, too casual. Not Comanche either. Wrong horses, wrong silhouettes. Settlers maybe, or traders. Sarah kept the rifle ready but visible, not aimed. The frontier demanded caution, not hostility. As they drew closer, she recognized the lead rider with a sinking heart. Jeremiah Wade, the cattle baron who'd been pressuring every small landowner in the region to sell. His men had been spotted near her water source last month. Wade had made no secret of his desire to control the entire valley and the creek that fed it. "Afternoon, Mrs. Blackwood," Wade called out, his voice carrying the false warmth of a snake. Oil salesman. He was a broad man with a groomed beard and expensive clothes that seemed out of place on the frontier. "Still working on this pitiful patch of dirt, I see." Sarah didn't respond, just shifted her weight and adjusted her grip on the rifle. The 4 men behind Wade spread out slightly, a subtle movement that sent alarm racing through her veins. "I've come to make my final offer," Wade continued, unperturbed by her silence. $200 for the deed to this land. More than fair, considering. "Considering what?" Sarah finally spoke, her voice rough from disuse. Days could pass without her speaking to anyone but Boaz and her few chickens. "Considering you won't make it through another season," Wade gestured at the struggling crops. "Considering a woman alone has no business holding land that could be put to proper use." Sarah spat in the dust. "My husband and I claimed this land. Legally, we improved it, built on it. The deed is mine and it's not for sale, not to you. Not to anyone." Wade's friendly demeanor dropped like a discarded mask. "I've been patient, Mrs. Blackwood. More patient than a stubborn widow deserves. But my patience has limits." So does my tolerance for trespassers. Sarah raised the rifle slightly. This conversation is over. Get off my land. The men behind Wade tensed, hands drifting to their holsters. For a moment, violence hung in the air, palpable as the heat. Then Wade smiled, a cold, calculating smile that chilled Sarah despite the punishing sun. Very well, but remember, I tried to be reasonable. He turned his horse, signaling his men to follow. Some decisions you can't take back, Mrs. Blackwood. Sarah held her position until the riders disappeared over the rise, then sagged against. Boaz, her heart hammering. The encounter had left her shaking, though she'd never have shown such weakness before Wade and his men. Their threats weren't idle. 2 other families had refused to sell, only to face mysterious misfortunes. A barn, fire, poisoned livestock. "Come on, old friend," she whispered to Boaz. "Let's get you cooled down." She led the horse back to the small barn beside her cabin. The structure was rough-hewn but solid, built by Tom's hands in their first year here. The cabin itself was modest. 2 rooms with a stone fireplace, furnishings crafted from local timber. Not much, but it was hers. After settling Boaz, Sarah collected eggs from her remaining chickens and drew water from the well. The bucket came up less than half full, the water level lower than yesterday. She'd have to dig deeper soon if the summer rains didn't come. Inside the cabin, she placed the eggs in a basket and poured herself a small measure of precious water. The silence pressed in around her. Sometimes, in moments like this, she'd catch herself listening for Tom's footsteps, his laughter. 3 years wasn't enough to break the habit of expecting him. As dusk approached, Sarah lit a single candle to conserve her supplies and began darning one of her 2 work dresses. Through the open window came the familiar sounds of nightfall. Crickets, the soft hoot of an owl, the rustling of wind through dry grass, then another sound, the unmistakable snort of horses being held quiet. Sarah blew out the candle and reached for her rifle, moving silently to the window. In the fading light, she could make out figures moving toward the barn. One carried a torch. Fear clawed at her throat. Wade hadn't waited long to make good on his implied threat. She counted quickly. 6 men, maybe 7, too many to fight off. Alone. Sarah grabbed her husband's old service pistol and a small leather pouch of ammunition from beneath a floorboard, then slipped out the back door. Her plan was to circle around, free Boaz from the barn before they could harm him, then make for the dense cedar thicket to the east, where she might lose them in darkness. But she'd barely cleared the cabin's shadow when rough hands seized her from behind. "Going somewhere, Mrs. Blackwood." The voice was unfamiliar. One of Wade's hired men, not Wade himself. Sarah fought like a wildcat, kicking and twisting, but another man grabbed her arms. The rifle was wrenched away, the pistol discovered and tossed aside. They dragged her, still fighting, to the front of the cabin, where 3 more men waited. In the distance, she could hear Boaz whinnying in distress. "Tie her up," ordered a man. Sarah recognized as Wade's foreman, a hard-eyed drifter known only as Hutchins. "Boss wants her to see this." They bound her wrists with rope and forced her to kneel in the packed dirt of her own yard. One of the men emerged from the barn, leading a terrified Boaz. Another followed with Sarah's chickens stuffed into a sack, her livelihood being loaded onto their horses like spoils of war. "Where's Wade?" Sarah demanded, straining against the ropes. Too cowardly to do his dirty work himself, Hutchins crouched before her, his breath reeking of tobacco and whiskey. "Mr. Wade is a businessman. Sometimes business requires persuasion." He stood and nodded to his men. "Light it up." Horror froze Sarah's blood as torches were lit and thrown onto the roof of her barn, against the walls of her cabin. The dry wood caught quickly, flames leaping hungrily in the gathering darkness. "No!" The scream tore from her throat. "No!" Hutchins watched impassively as the fire spread. Mr. Wade's offer still stands. $200 for your signature on a deed. Otherwise, you've got nothing left. Sarah's home, the home she'd built with Tom, where she'd nursed him in his final days, where every beam and board held memories, transformed into a pyre before her eyes. The heat singed her skin, smoke stinging her eyes until tears streamed down her face. But it wasn't surrender that filled her heart as she knelt there in the dirt. It was rage. Pure, clarifying rage that burned hotter than the flames consuming. Her life's work. "I will never sign," she said, voice steady despite the tears. "Never." The men laughed. Hutchins shrugged. "Have it your way. By morning, there won't be anything left but ash. Maybe you'll be more reasonable then. Or maybe we'll just let the desert finish what we started." He turned to the others. "Tie her to that post. Make sure she has a good view." They dragged her to the hitching post near what had been her garden and secured her there, the ropes cutting into her already raw wrists. The men settled in to watch the spectacle, passing a bottle between them, making crude jokes about the stubborn widow and what would become of her now. Sarah didn't give them the satisfaction of further protests or pleas. She stared into the flames, memories flashing before her, Tom carrying her over the threshold of the newly built cabin, winter evenings by the fire, the simple joy of harvesting their first crops, all turning to ash. Hours passed. The men drank and waited, occasionally tossing another item from her property into the fire for amusement. Sarah's throat was parched, her wrists bloody from subtle, constant struggle against the ropes. She'd almost worked one hand free when Hutchins approached again. "Sun'll be up soon," he said, squatting beside her. "Last chance before we ride out. Sign the deed, take the money, start fresh somewhere else." Sarah turned to look at him fully, letting him see the hatred in her eyes. "I'd sooner die on this land than sell it to Wade." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Hutchins studied her, then nodded slowly. "That can be arranged too." He stood and called to his men. "Finish up. We need to—" His words cut off abruptly as his head snapped toward the ridge east of the burning homestead. Sarah followed his gaze. Silhouetted against the pre-dawn sky stood a line of mounted warriors, their distinctive profiles unmistakable even in the dim light. Comanche, at least a dozen, maybe more, watching silently from the high ground. "Oh God," one of Wade's men whispered. "We're dead. We're all dead." The Comanche had been at peace with settlers in this region for nearly 2 years, following a treaty with the territorial government. But the peace was fragile, and crossing paths with a war party this far from military protection was every frontiersman's nightmare. "Mount up!" Hutchins barked, fear stripping away his arrogance. "Now!" As Wade's men scrambled for their horses, the warriors on the ridge raised their weapons. The rising sun caught the edge of a lance, setting it aflame with golden light, and then, with a war cry that seemed to shake the very ground, they charged. The thunder of hooves shook the ground. As the Comanche warriors descended from the ridge, their war cries splitting the dawn air, Wade's men scrambled for their mounts, abandoning any pretense of bravado. Hutchins fired a wild shot toward the charging warriors before leaping onto his horse. "What about her?" one of the men shouted, gesturing toward Sarah, still bound to the post. "Leave her," Hutchins barked, already wheeling his horse around. "Maybe they'll be too busy with her to follow us." Sarah watched as her tormentors fled, disappearing into the rising dust cloud of their own making. The cowardice of these men who had seemed so powerful just moments ago might have been satisfying under different circumstances. Now, it simply meant she was alone to face whatever came next. The Comanche warriors split formation with practiced precision, half pursuing Wade's men, the others circling the burning homestead. Their faces were painted for war, their expressions unreadable as they assessed the destruction. One warrior, larger than the others, with a headdress of eagle feathers and red handprints painted across his chest, dismounted and approached Sarah slowly. She lifted her chin, determined to meet death with dignity, if that was what awaited her. Stories of Comanche raids had circulated through settlements for years, tales of torture, captivity, lives destroyed. But Sarah had also heard other stories, whispered by traders who actually dealt with the tribes. Stories of honor, of justice that operated by different rules, but justice nonetheless. The warrior studied her face, then the ropes binding her wrists to the post. Without a word, he drew a knife from his belt, a blade that gleamed wickedly in the light of the still-burning cabin. Sarah held her breath, refusing to close her eyes. With a single, swift motion, he cut through her bonds. Blood rushed painfully back into her hands as they fell free. The warrior stepped back, giving her space as she staggered to her feet, legs numb from hours of kneeling. He spoke a few words in Comanche to the others who had remained behind, his voice deep and commanding. A younger warrior approached, offering a water skin. Sarah hesitated only a moment before accepting it, the thirst overriding caution. The water was cool and clean, washing away the taste of smoke and fear. "Thank you," she said simply, returning the skin. The leader watched her with dark, assessing eyes. "You fight those men," he said in accented but clear English. "Why?" The question surprised her. "This is my land," she answered, voice raw from smoke and emotion. "They wanted to take it." He nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he had already guessed. "I am Quanah," he said, touching his chest. "Those men." He pointed in the direction Wade's men had fled. "Enemies of yours, enemies of mine." Sarah tried to process what was happening. The infamous Comanche chief Quanah Parker stood before her, a man whose name was whispered with both fear and respect throughout the territories. Half-white by birth, he had become one of the most formidable Comanche leaders, resisting the encroachment of settlers onto tribal lands. "Why did you help me?" Sarah asked, wincing as she rubbed her bloodied wrists. Quanah gestured to the burning structures. "We watch. See men force woman. See them burn." His eyes narrowed. Dishonorable. The remaining warriors had dismounted now, moving carefully around the property. They weren't looting as she might have expected. Instead, they seemed to be examining tracks, conferring among themselves, professional warriors assessing a battlefield. One of them approached Quanah, speaking rapidly in Comanche while pointing toward the western horizon. Quanah's expression darkened. "The others return," he told Sarah. "Killed 2. More escaped." He studied her for a moment. "You have nowhere now." It wasn't a question. Sarah looked at the smoldering remains of her home, the barn now collapsed into a heap of charred timber. Everything she owned, her few clothes, Tom's letters, the family Bible, her supplies for winter, all gone. "I have the land," she said stubbornly, though she knew it was a hollow claim, without shelter or tools with her horse and livestock. Stolen, the land alone couldn't sustain her. Quanah looked skeptical. "Land needs people, needs protection." He glanced at the sky, calculating something. "Men will return. More men. They want this." He stomped his foot on the ground for emphasis. Sarah knew he was right. Wade wouldn't give up so easily. He'd send more men or come himself with the law twisted to serve his purposes. "What choice do I have?" she asked, more to herself than to the Comanche chief. Quanah pointed toward the east. "Comancheria," he said, naming the vast territory his. "People still controlled. You come, heal, then decide." Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "You want me to go with you? To your camp?" "Not prisoner," he clarified firmly. "Guest until safe." The offer was unexpected, almost unthinkable. White settlers didn't willingly enter Comanche territory, especially not women alone. But the alternative was equally impossible. Staying here meant certain death, whether quick at the hands of Wade's men or slow from exposure and starvation. The decision was interrupted by a warning call from one of the warriors who had been scouting the perimeter. He pointed toward the road, where a cloud of dust signaled approaching riders. "Wade," Sarah said, dread settling in her stomach. "He's coming to finish what his men started." Quanah's expression hardened. He barked orders to his warriors, who immediately mounted their horses. One rider brought forward an extra horse, a paint mare with intelligent eyes. "Decide now," Quanah said urgently. "Stay for death or ride for life." Sarah looked once more at the ruins of her home, at the grave on the hilltop where Tom rested. Everything that had defined her life was here. But Tom wouldn't want her to die defending ashes. "I'll ride," she said. A young warrior helped her mount. The paint mare, showing her where to hold the simple hackamore that served as a bridle. Sarah hadn't ridden bareback since childhood, but her body remembered the balance required. The warriors formed up around her, not as captors, but as escorts. Quanah raised his hand, signaling their departure. As they crested the ridge, the Comanche had first appeared on. Sarah allowed herself one backward glance. In the distance, she could see riders approaching her property, at least a dozen men, Wade himself likely among them. They would find nothing but smoking ruins and tracks leading eastward. Sarah wondered what story Wade would tell in town, that Comanche had attacked a helpless widow, perhaps. The irony wasn't lost on her. The terrain changed as they rode east, rocky hillsides giving way to rolling plains dotted with mesquite and scrub oak. The Comanche warriors moved with the effortless coordination of men who had spent lifetimes on horseback, occasionally sending scouts ahead or to the flanks, maintaining a vigilant watch. Sarah's initial terror gradually gave way to exhaustion. She hadn't slept in over a day, had been bound for hours, and now was riding harder and farther than she had in years. Only stubborn determination kept her upright on the horse. Quanah noticed. He called a halt beside a small creek around midday, allowing the horses to drink while the warriors took turns watching their back trail. A young warrior offered Sarah pemmican, dried meat pounded with berries into a dense, nutritious cake. The unfamiliar food was tough, but sustaining. "Thank you," she said, using the phrase she'd heard traders use, "Ura." The young warrior looked surprised, then nodded with approval. "Ura," he repeated, pointing to himself. "Tosh away." "Sarah," she replied, tapping her own chest. Before they could exchange more words, Quanah approached. He crouched beside Sarah, offering a small container of what proved to be a pungent salve. He gestured toward her wrists, which were raw and crusted with dried blood. "Medicine," he explained. "Stop pain, stop sickness." Sarah hesitated only briefly before extending her arms. Quanah applied the salve with surprising gentleness, his calloused warrior's hands careful with her wounds. The balm stung initially, then began to numb the worst of the pain. "Why help me?" she asked again, needing to understand. "I'm a settler, your enemy." Quanah finished bandaging her wrists with strips of clean buckskin before answering. "My mother," he said finally, "was like you, white woman, taken by Comanche." His eyes met hers, filled with a complexity she couldn't fully decipher. "She become Comanche, become my mother." Sarah knew the story. Most settlers did. Cynthia Ann Parker, captured as a child, had grown up among the Comanche, married a chief, and borne him children, including Quanah. Years later, Texas Rangers had rescued her, bringing her back to white society against her will. She had died of a broken heart, starving herself after being separated from her Comanche children. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, understanding better. "Now, about what happened to her." A shadow passed over Quanah's face, brief but unmistakable. "White men take mothers, wives, children, then call us savage." He glanced at the distant horizon. Wade men, they burn home, leave woman to die. Who is savage? The question hung between them, requiring no answer. Sarah looked down at her bandaged wrists, then at the warriors who had saved her. Everything she'd been taught about the Comanche clashed with what she was experiencing. These men could have killed her or left her to Wade's mercy. Instead, they had cut her bonds and offered protection. "My husband," she said hesitantly. "Tom. He traded with Comanche hunters sometimes. He said you were fair men if treated with respect." She hadn't understood then, had feared for Tom's safety every time he mentioned these encounters. He was right. Quanah studied her, seeming to weigh her sincerity. "Your husband, he had good eyes, saw truth." He gestured toward the horizon. "Many settlers see only what they fear." Sarah thought of the conversations in town, the warnings about bloodthirsty savages waiting to attack innocent settlers. She thought of Wade and his men, who called themselves civilized while burning. A woman's home around her. "Fear makes people blind," she agreed quietly. Quanah nodded once, accepting her words. "Two roads," he said, gesturing east and west. "White Road, Comanche Road. I walk both." He fixed her with a penetrating gaze. "Maybe you walk New Road now." And two. The weight of his words settled on her. This wasn't just about temporary sanctuary. Quanah was offering her a chance to see a world few white settlers ever witnessed, to understand a way of life that most dismissed as primitive or savage without ever knowing its truth. Toshaway approached, offering Sarah a deerskin flask of water. She drank gratefully, realizing how parched she remained despite the earlier water. The young warrior pointed to her red hair, saying something in Comanche that made two nearby warriors grin. "He says your hair is like fire," Quanah translated. "Good spirit sign." Sarah touched her hair self-consciously. The thick auburn waves had always been a source of both pride and trouble. Her mother had called it her crown. Drunken men in town had used it as an excuse to harass her. "Tell him I hope it's a good sign," she said. "I could use some luck." When Quanah translated, Toshaway nodded vigorously and made a gesture over his heart, then pointed to the sky. "He says luck is for gamblers," Quanah explained. "Strength is for warriors." The chief's dark eyes assessed her. "You have strength, survived alone, fought men." The unexpectedness of the compliment left Sarah momentarily speechless. Since Tom's death, she'd received pity, unwanted advances, and thinly veiled suggestions that she couldn't manage alone. No one had acknowledged the fierce determination that kept her working the land despite everything. "I did what I had to," she said simply. Quanah almost smiled. "That is strength." The scout who had been watching their back trail suddenly appeared over a small rise, riding hard. He called out in Comanche as he approached, his expression urgent. The warriors immediately tensed, hands moving to weapons. "What is it?" Sarah asked, alarmed by the sudden shift. "Wade men joined others," Quanah explained grimly. "Ranger with them now." Sarah's stomach dropped. The Texas Rangers were a force to be reckoned with, skilled trackers and fighters who wouldn't hesitate to pursue a war party they believed had kidnapped a white woman. "They'll think you took me," she realized aloud. "They won't understand I chose to come." "Truth matters little," Quanah said, his voice hard with experience. "They hunt, we run, or we fight." He glanced at her. "Fighting means blood." Sarah knew what he wasn't saying. If the Rangers caught up to them, there would be casualties on both sides. Men would die because of her decision. "There's another way," she said suddenly, an idea forming. "If I could speak to them, they—" "Do not listen to women who ride with Comanche," Quanah interrupted. "They see only what they expect." Sarah wanted to argue, but knew he was right. Even if she tried to explain, Wade would twist her words. The Rangers would see a woman potentially under duress or suffering from trauma, not someone making a rational choice. "We ride," Quanah ordered. "Men follow, many men." The brief rest ended as the warriors mounted quickly. Sarah climbed onto the paint mare with more confidence now, though her muscles protested. As they rode harder toward the east, Sarah realized she had crossed an invisible boundary, not just the line between settled territory and Comancheria, but between her old life and whatever uncertain future awaited. Behind her lay ashes and grief. Ahead lay the unknown, frightening but alive with possibility. For the first time since Tom's death, Sarah felt something stir within her that she had thought forever extinguished. Hope. The Comanche camp sprawled across a hidden valley nestled between two forested mesas. Unlike the crude stereotypes of Indian villages Sarah had heard described in town, this was a complex, well-organized community. Dozens of teepees arranged in a circular pattern surrounded a central gathering area, with smaller family groupings creating neighborhoods within the larger structure. Smoke from cooking fires rose in thin columns against the evening sky, and the sounds of daily life, children playing, women talking, dogs barking, created a tapestry of normality that seemed at odds with her expectations. Quanah led their party into the camp at a measured pace, allowing word of their arrival to spread ahead of them. Warriors emerged from teepees. Women paused in their tasks, and children gathered in curious clusters as the procession made its slow way toward the center. Sarah felt the weight of countless eyes upon her, some merely curious, others openly suspicious. She sat straighter on her paint mare, determined not to show fear despite the churning in her stomach. The two surviving members of Wade's party rode behind her under guard, their expressions bleak as they contemplated their uncertain fate. An older man with grey braids and a deeply lined face stepped forward as they reached the center of the camp. He wore a fringed buckskin shirt adorned with intricate beadwork and carried himself with unmistakable authority. Quanah dismounted and approached him, speaking in Comanche while gesturing occasionally toward Sarah and the prisoners. "Who is that?" Sarah asked Toshaway, who remained beside her. "Horseback," the young warrior replied in his limited English. "Great chief, Quanah's uncle." The conversation between the two men continued for several minutes, their expressions serious, but not hostile. Finally, Horseback nodded and turned his attention to Sarah, studying her with keen eyes that missed nothing. "Come," he said in surprisingly clear English. "You are guests of Quanah. You will stay with his sister." Sarah slid carefully from her horse, legs stiff after the long journey. A young woman about her own age approached, tall and striking, with the same proud bearing as Quanah, but softer features that hinted at their shared parentage. "Topsana," Quanah introduced her. "My sister. She speaks some English." Topsana's dark eyes held none of the suspicion Sarah had seen in others. Instead, there was a quiet assessment and perhaps a glint of curiosity. "Come," she said simply, gesturing for Sarah to follow. Before Sarah could move, Horseback stepped forward. "Your name?" he asked directly. "Sarah Blackwood," she replied, meeting his gaze steadily. The elder chief nodded once. "Sarah Blackwood," he repeated, giving each syllable equal weight. "You are under the protection of Quanah's band. No harm will come to you here." He glanced at the assembled crowd. "But you are not free to leave. Not yet." Sarah understood. She was safe, but also a potential hostage if negotiations with settlers became necessary. Her status was ambiguous, neither prisoner nor truly free. "I understand," she said. "Thank you for your hospitality." Something like approval flickered in Horseback's eyes. He turned away, speaking to the warriors about the disposition of the actual prisoners. Sarah followed Topsana through the crowd, acutely aware of the whispers that followed them. Topsana led her to a well-maintained teepee near the edge of the central circle. "My home," she explained, holding open the flap. "Now yours too." Inside, the teepee was surprisingly spacious and comfortable. Buffalo robes covered the packed earth floor, and personal belongings were neatly arranged around the edges. A small fire pit occupied the center, currently unlit in the warmth of the day. Bundles of herbs hung from the supporting poles, filling the space with subtle, pleasant aromas. "You sleep here," Topsana indicated a pile of soft furs on one side of the tipi. "I will bring water. You wash." Left alone, Sarah sank gratefully onto the furs, the exhaustion of the past 2 days catching up with her at once. Her dress was filthy, torn in places and stained with smoke, blood and trail dust. Her hair hung in tangled knots around her face, and her skin felt gritty with dried sweat. She hadn't seen a mirror, but imagined she looked as wild as any of the warriors who had escorted her. Topsana returned with a clay basin of water, a small cake of soap made from yucca root, and a bundle of fabric. "Wash," she repeated, "then rest. Many questions tomorrow." The simple kindness brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes. "Thank you," she managed. "You're very kind to a stranger." Topsana paused at the teepee entrance. "Not a stranger," she said, softly. "Quanah says you have a fire spirit, like our mother." With that, she disappeared outside, leaving Sarah to her ablutions. The cool water was blissful against Sarah's skin as she scrubbed away the grime of her journey. The soap smelled of herbs and fat, different from the lye soap she was accustomed to, but effective. When she was as clean as possible without a proper bath, she examined the bundle Topsana had left. It contained a simple dress of soft deerskin, decorated with subtle quill work around the neckline, and a pair of moccasins. The clothing was well worn but clean, clearly one of Topsana's own garments offered for her use. Sarah hesitated only briefly before removing her ruined dress and slipping into the deerskin one. It fit well enough, though it was slightly long. For her shorter frame, exhaustion pulled at her like quicksand. Sarah arranged her hair as best she could without a comb, then stretched out on the furs. Despite the strangeness of her surroundings and the uncertainty of her future, sleep claimed her almost instantly. She woke to the sounds of the camp coming alive with morning activities. For a moment, disorientation gripped her, the familiar walls of her cabin replaced by the curved surface of the tipi, the smell of coffee and wood smoke replaced by leather and herbs. Then memory returned in a rush. The burning homestead, the desperate flight, the hidden canyon, and finally this Comanche camp. Topsana entered the tipi carrying a wooden bowl filled with a steaming porridge of some kind and a water skin. She nodded approvingly at Sarah in the deerskin dress. "Good. Old clothes are bad memories," she said, offering the bowl. "Eat. Council meets after sunrise. You must speak." Sarah accepted the food, a mixture of ground corn, dried berries and nuts, cooked to a thick consistency. It was bland but filling, and she realized how hungry she was. "Council?" she asked between bites. "Elders, chiefs, decide about you, about white prisoners." Topsana sat cross-legged across from her, watching her eat. "Quanah speaks for you, but you must also speak the truth." Sarah nodded her understanding. "Will they believe me, a white woman?" Topsana considered the question seriously. Some yes, some no. She touched the quillwork on the dress Sarah wore. "My mother made this. She was white woman too, before becoming Comanche." Sarah remembered what Quanah had told her about their mother, Cynthia Ann Parker, captured as a child and later forcibly rescued by Texas Rangers. "Do you remember her?" A shadow passed over Topsana's face. "Little. I was young when white soldiers took her away." Her fingers traced the pattern on the dress almost reverently. "She taught me this work, said white women use needles in different ways, but both make beauty. The connection between them, both women caught between worlds, seemed to strengthen. In that moment, Topsana might not fully trust her yet, but she saw in Sarah an echo of her lost mother. "I never knew my mother," Sarah offered hesitantly. "She died when I was very young." Topsana nodded. "Many mothers lost. White sickness, Indian wars, hard country for women. She rose gracefully. Come, we wash in the stream before the council, then I fix my hair the proper way. Sarah followed Topsana through the camp, still, drawing curious stares, though less openly hostile than the previous evening. Children peeked from behind their mothers, some daring to wave or smile, before being hushed by watchful adults. The stream lay in a sheltered area a short distance from the camp, screened by willows and cottonwoods. Several women were already, and there, some washing clothes, others bathing young children. Their conversation stopped abruptly when Sarah appeared. Topsana spoke rapidly in Comanche, her tone firm but not angry. The women listened, occasionally glancing at Sarah with expressions ranging from skepticism to curiosity. Finally, one older woman with silver-streaked braids nodded and said something that made the others return to their tasks, though with occasional watchful glances toward the newcomer. "What did you tell them?" Sarah asked quietly as they moved to a secluded bend in the stream. "That you are under Quana's protection. That you fight Wade men who burn homes like white soldiers burned our villages." Topsana began unbraiding her long black hair. "That you are not an enemy unless we make you one." The pragmatic assessment was oddly comforting. Sarah followed Topsana's example, removing the deerskin dress and wading into the cool water in her undergarments. The stream was shallow but clear, the bottom sandy and pleasant against her feet. Topsana showed her how to use a particular plant root to clean her hair, working it into a lather that removed the last traces of smoke and dust. The simple act of bathing, a normal, everyday ritual, helped settle Sarah's nerves about the coming council. As they dressed afterward, Topsana produced a carved bone comb and began working it gently through Sarah's auburn hair, untangling the knots with surprising patience. "Your hair is an unusual color," she observed, "like autumn leaves, like sunset." Her fingers worked deftly, separating the thick strands. "Good medicine color." "It caused me trouble sometimes," Sarah admitted. "People notice it." Topsana nodded, understanding. To be noticed is dangerous sometimes, but also powerful. She began braiding Sarah's hair in the Comanche style, 2 long plaits secured with narrow strips of leather. "Now you look less like a scared settler wife, more like a woman who chooses her path." When they returned to the camp, preparations for the council were underway. A larger teepee had been erected in the central area, its entrance flap open to the morning sun. Old men and respected warriors gathered in small groups, their manner serious as they discussed the matter at hand. Quana approached as Sarah and Topsana neared the council teepee. He nodded approval at Sarah's transformed appearance. "Good, you look strong now," he studied her face. "Are you afraid?" Sarah considered lying, then decided against it. "Yes, but not of your people. I fear what happens when more settlers come looking for me. For the men who followed us." Quana's expression remained impassive, but something like respect flickered in his eyes. "Truth is a good weapon in council. Use it well." He gestured toward the teepee entrance. They wait now. Inside, a circle of Comanche leaders sat on buffalo robes around a small central fire. Horseback occupied the position directly. Opposite the entrance, with other elders and war chiefs arranged according to some hierarchy Sarah didn't understand. Quana guided her to a place within the circle, then took his own position to the right of Horseback. "Sarah Blackwood," Horseback began without preamble, "you come to our land in a strange way. Not a prisoner, not friends, not an enemy." His piercing gaze fixed on her face. "Council wants truth from your mouth. Why do Wade men burn your home? Why you not return to your people?" Sarah took a deep breath, conscious of the crucial importance of her words. She began simply, telling of her years working the land with her husband, his death from fever, her determination to maintain their homestead alone. She described Wade's increasing pressure to sell her land, his threats when she refused, and, finally, the brutal attack that destroyed everything she had built. When your warriors appeared, Wade's men were prepared to leave me to die, she concluded. They saw me as property to be claimed or discarded. My own people would likely believe their lies about my disappearance. She met Horseback's unwavering gaze. I chose to come with Quanah because he offered safety when my own kind offered none. An elder with a face deeply etched by time and weather spoke up in Comanche. Quanah translated, "Charging Bull asks why we should risk war with settlers for one white woman." The question was fair. Sarah thought carefully before answering. "You shouldn't risk war for me. I'm not worth that price." She straightened her shoulders. "But Wade and men like him already plan war against you. My presence is just an excuse, not a cause." When Quanah translated, murmurs of agreement rippled. Through the council, another chief spoke, his tone challenging. "Whitehorse asks what you offer Comanche in return for protection." Quanah relayed. Sarah hesitated. What could she possibly offer these self-sufficient people? "I have skills," she said finally. "I can grow food from the earth. I can sow, cook, preserve meat and fruits. I can read and write the white man's words. Perhaps that knowledge could be useful in understanding treaties or warnings." She paused, then added truthfully, "I'm strong, and I learn quickly." The council deliberated after her words were translated, speaking among themselves in Comanche, too rapidly for her to catch any words she might have recognized. Finally, Horseback raised his hand in silence. "Council has questions about white soldiers," he said. "Will they come looking for white prisoners? How many? When?" Sarah considered carefully. "The Texas Rangers will likely come searching once Wade reports what happened. Perhaps 20 men, maybe more, if they can convince the army that Comanche have broken the peace treaty." She frowned, calculating. "It would take at least 5 days for Wade to reach the nearest ranger station and for them to organize a search party. They would be well armed, but might not expect to find a full camp." This information sparked intense discussion. War chiefs gestured emphatically while elders counseled caution. Quanah remained mostly silent, listening carefully to all sides. Eventually, Horseback turned back to Sarah. "Last question. If Rangers come demand prisoners and you, what should Comanche do with Sarah Blackwood?" The true test. Sarah felt the weight of every eye in the council upon her. "If my presence threatens your people, I will return with the Rangers willingly," she said steadily. "I would tell them the truth, that I came by choice, that I was treated with honor, but they may not believe me." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "However, if you think my knowledge could help defend against Wade's lies, I would stay hidden until the danger passes. The choice should be yours, as the risk falls most heavily on your people." When Quanah translated, approval showed on several faces. Horseback nodded slowly, then conferred quietly with the elders nearest him. Finally, he spoke directly to Sarah. "Council decides. Sarah Blackwood stays with Quanah's band for now. Not a prisoner, not yet Comanche." He pointed to the entrance. Flap. "Outside, the path goes many ways, west to White Towns, east deeper into Comanche lands, north to Kiowa allies, south to Mexican territories." His hand returned to rest on his knee. "Which path you walk, your choice will come. But not today." With that pronouncement, the council ended. Sarah followed Quanah outside, blinking in the bright sunlight after the dimness of the teepee interior. "What happens now?" she asked, still processing the council's decision. "Now you learn," Quanah said simply. "Learn our ways. Learn to survive here." He gestured toward the women's area of the camp. "Top Sana teaches you women's work. I will teach you Comanche words. Others teach you to ride properly, to find water, to know plants that heal and plants that kill." His dark eyes held hers. "Learning keeps you alive when choices come." Sarah nodded, understanding the wisdom in his approach. To make true choices, she needed knowledge of this new world, its dangers and opportunities. "And the prisoners?" she asked. "What will happen to them?" "Council decides tomorrow," Quanah replied, his expression unreadable. "Perhaps trade them for supplies, perhaps use them to send a message to Wade." He started walking toward the horse, herd at the edge of camp. "Come, first lesson begins now. You must learn to ride like Comanche, not like a scared settler." Sarah followed, aware that her education in this new world was just beginning. Behind her lay ashes and unanswered questions. Ahead lay a path of learning and adaptation. For the first time since watching her home burn, she felt the stirring of possibility, not just for survival, but for renewal. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of new experiences. True to his word, Quanah began Sarah's education. Immediately, starting with horsemanship. The Comanche were renowned across the frontier as the finest horsemen in North America, capable of feats that seemed impossible to outsiders. "Settler rides on horse," Quanah explained as they stood beside her paint mare. "Comanche becomes one with horses." He demonstrated the difference, mounting his own stallion with a fluid leap that used no stirrups or saddle. The horse responded to subtle shifts in his weight and pressure from his knees, turning and stopping with barely perceptible commands. Sarah's first attempts at bareback riding ended with her in the dust, much to the amusement of the children, who gathered to watch. But she persisted, ignoring bruised dignity and sore muscles. By the 5th day, she could stay mounted through a slow trot, her body gradually learning the rhythm and balance required. "Good," Quanah acknowledged, when she completed a circuit of the practice area without falling. Not Comanche yet, but no longer a settler who bounces like a sack of corn. Coming from the stoic chief, this qualified as high praise. Sarah found herself unexpectedly pleased by his approval. Afternoons were spent with Topsana and the other women, learning the daily tasks that kept the camp functioning. Sarah discovered that her frontier skills, while valuable, were often executed differently here. The women showed her how to scrape and tan hides using the Comanche method, which produced softer, more supple leather than she had ever achieved. "Pull with grain," instructed Stan's tall woman, an elder who had taken a particular interest in teaching Sarah. "Not against. Let's hide and tell you which way." Food preparation presented similar challenges. Sarah knew how to cook and preserve meat, but Comanche techniques for smoking and drying produced more flavorful results that lasted longer, without salt, which was precious and scarce. She learned to identify edible plants that had been all around her homestead, but that she had never recognized as food. Purslane, lamb's quarters, and wild onions that added variety to the diet. "Your people starve with food growing at their feet," Stan's tall woman observed one day as they gathered wild plums. "See only what they plant themselves." The observation struck Sarah as profoundly true. How much had she missed by seeing the land only through the lens of what she already knew? Evenings brought language lessons around the fire. Sarah's tongue struggled with Comanche pronunciations at first, but she persisted, knowing that communication was essential to true understanding. She began with practical words, names for common objects, basic actions, simple phrases for daily needs. "Ura," she would repeat. "Thank you." "Ha," for yes. "Ki," for no. "Numunu," the word the Comanche called themselves, meaning simply the people. The children proved to be her best teachers, less self-conscious than adults about correcting her and more patient with repetition. 8-year-old Little Feather took particular delight in teaching her the names of animals, making Sarah repeat the sounds until she matched his pronunciation exactly. "Pooh," he would say, pointing to a horse. "Pooh," Sarah would echo to his critical ear. "No pooh," he would insist, somehow making the sound entirely different in a way Sarah's ear struggled to detect. But slowly she improved. Words became sentences. Gestures became unnecessary for basic communication. The strange sounds began to form patterns she could recognize and reproduce. Throughout these lessons, Sarah remained aware of her ambiguous status. She was neither prisoner nor truly free, neither Comanche nor fully outsider. The women watched her carefully when she handled knives or worked near the edge of camp. Warriors still tracked her movements, though with decreasing scrutiny as days passed. The two prisoners from Wade's party fared differently. Kept under closer guard in a teepee at the camp's edge, they were treated neither cruel nor kindly, simply maintained alive and unharmed while the council deliberated their fate. Sarah avoided them, uncomfortable with the hatred that blazed in. Their eyes, whenever she passed, wearing Comanche clothing, her hair braided in the tribal style. A week after her arrival, Quanah summoned Sarah to accompany him on a ride beyond the camp boundaries. Topsana helped her prepare, offering a better-fitting deerskin dress, adorned with more elaborate beadwork than the everyday garment she had been wearing. Council decided about prisoners, Topsana explained as she helped Sarah braid her hair. Quanah takes you to sea. Anxiety fluttered in Sarah's chest. Will they be executed? Topsana looked surprised. No, Comanche does not waste good trade. Prisoners are worth more alive. Sarah's relief must have shown on her face because Topsana studied her curiously. You care about the men who would have killed you. Not exactly, Sarah tried to explain, but more death. It solves nothing. Creates more hatred, more reasons for revenge. Topsana considered this, then nodded slowly. My mother said similar things. Said circle of vengeance has no end. A shadow crossed her face. But vengeance found her anyway. The quiet observation hung between them, a reminder of the brutal realities that shaped life on the frontier for both sides. Sarah rode out with Quanah as the sun reached its zenith. Her horsemanship had improved enough that she could maintain a respectable pace without clutching desperately at the mare's mane, though she still lacked the effortless grace of even the youngest Comanche riders. They traveled for nearly an hour, following a winding path through mesquite thickets and across rolling hills covered in buffalo grass. Finally, they created a rise that overlooked a well-used trail, one of the main routes between frontier settlements. Quanah signaled for her to remain silent as they dismounted and moved to a position where they could observe without being seen. Below, a small party of Comanche warriors waited in a hidden draw, the two prisoners from Wade's party sitting bound but unharmed nearby. What's happening? Sarah whispered. Watch, Quanah replied. Minutes later, dust rose in the distance as riders approached along the trail. 3 men in the distinctive garb of civilian scouts who often worked for the Rangers. They rode cautiously, rifles ready, clearly alert for signs of danger. The leader held up his hand as they neared the hidden Comanche. He studied the ground, noting something that caught his attention. Deliberate tracks, Sarah realized, left to be found. The scouts conferred briefly, then began following the sign off the main trail toward the draw. As they rounded a bend, they came face to face with the waiting warriors. From her vantage point, Sarah could see the scouts stiffen, hands moving toward weapons. But they were outnumbered, covered by Comanche bows and rifles before they could fire a shot. A tense moment passed before the lead scout slowly raised his empty hands. One of the Comanche warriors brought forward the 2 prisoners. Words were exchanged, too distant for Sarah to hear, but the body language suggested negotiation rather than threats. After several minutes, the lead scout nodded and removed something from his saddlebag, a small cask and several packages wrapped in oilcloth. Trade, Quanah explained quietly. Prisoners for medicine, coffee, bullets. The Rangers agreed to this? Sarah asked, surprised. Not Rangers. Traders who work with Rangers. Quanah watched as the exchange concluded. The prisoners transferred. To the scouts' custody, the trade goods to the Comanche. Rangers make war, traders make profit, different purposes. Sarah observed the transaction with newfound understanding. The frontier wasn't simply divided between settlers and natives. It operated with complex networks of relationships, pragmatic arrangements that often defied official policies. "What message will the prisoners take back?" she asked. "That they lived because the Comanche chose mercy," Quanah replied. "That woman they sought is under protection. That peace can hold if settlers respect boundaries." His expression hardened slightly. "And that next raiding party will not return alive." As they watched, the scouts and released prisoners departed along the trail, while the Comanche warriors took a different route that would eventually lead them back to camp. "You showed me this for a reason," Sarah observed as they returned. "Not just about the prisoners." Quanah nodded, pleased by her perception. "You see how tribes survive, not just by fighting, by knowing when to trade, when to threaten, when to disappear." He gestured toward the departing scouts. "Those men will tell others what happened. Story will change with each telling. Some will hear warnings, some will hear weakness, some will hear of the opportunity." "And what should I hear?" Sarah asked directly. "That your life has value," Quanah said simply. "Worth trading for, worth protecting, but also a complicated future." The BE implications were clear. Her presence created both opportunity and danger for the tribe that had taken her in. The balance could shift with changing circumstances beyond her control. They rode in silence for a time, Sarah contemplating this new understanding of her position. Finally, she asked the question that had been troubling her since the council meeting. "Why did you really help me, Quanah?" The truth. The Comanche chief considered her question as they rode side by side across the prairie. "Many reasons," he said finally. "Saw injustice, saw courage when you faced Hutchins, saw a chance to show not all Comanche are savage killers from scary stories." He glanced at her. "But also saw my mother in you." "Because I'm white," Sarah asked quietly. "Because you stand between worlds," he corrected. "Not fully accepted in either. Must create own path." His voice carried a hint of rare emotion. "My mother never chose her path at first, was too young when taken. Later chose Comanche ways, Comanche husband, Comanche children. But white world still claimed her, took her back by force." Sarah had heard fragments of the story, but never from someone who had lived it. "You were searching for her when she died?" Quanah nodded once, his jaw tight. "Rangers kept her away from us. She stopped eating, stopped living." His hands tightened on his horse's mane. "White medicine can't heal a broken spirit." The personal tragedy behind the famous chief's mixed heritage struck Sarah deeply. She understood better now his complex relationship with both sides of the frontier conflict, and perhaps why he had intervened when he saw Wade's men, forcing her to watch her home burn. "I'm sorry," she said simply, "for what happened to her, to your family." Quanah acknowledged her words with a slight inclination of his head. "Cannot change the past, can only make a better future." He studied her face. "You learn Comanche's ways well. Quick mind, strong hands, but must decide soon what path you walk." "What do you mean?" "Season changes soon," he explained. "Camp moves to winter grounds next full moon, further from settlements, deeper in Comancheria." His implication was clear. The deeper she went with the tribe, the harder any return to white society would become. The camp was buzzing with unusual activity when they returned. Warriors gathered in small groups, speaking in low, urgent tones. Women packed belongings with greater haste than normal. Even the children seemed subdued, staying closer to their mothers than was typical. Topsana hurried to meet them as they dismounted. "Scouts returned," she explained tensely. "Bring news." Quanah's expression darkened as he listened to his sister's rapid Comanche. He turned to Sarah, his manner grave. Rangers at Western Trading Post, many with army soldiers, asking questions about white women with Comanche. Sarah's stomach clenched. Because of me, not just you, Quanah replied. Excuse me to press further into our hunting grounds. They bring a surveyor who marks maps. His meaning was clear. The search for Sarah was being used to justify military exploration of Comanche territory. What will you do? She asked. Council meets now. I must go. He paused, then added, decision time comes sooner than expected for all of us. As Quanah strode toward the council teepee, Topsana led Sarah back to their shared dwelling. Inside, Sarah noticed that many of Topsana's belongings had already been packed into parfleche containers, the rawhide boxes used for transporting household goods during camp moves. Will we leave soon? Sarah asked. Topsana nodded, continuing to organize her possessions efficiently. Must reach winter grounds before soldiers follow. It's too dangerous here now. Sarah sat on her sleeping furs, the implications washing over her. If she remained with the Comanche as they moved to their winter camp, she would be committing to a deeper separation from white society, possibly a permanent one. If she chose to return to the settlements, she would face Wade's accusations, possible legal charges, and certainly the suspicion and ostracism that would follow her association with the Comanche. Topsana, she said hesitantly, if I stayed with the people through winter, would I ever be accepted? Truly. The Comanche woman paused in her packing, considering the question seriously. Some never accept. Some already do. She gestured to the dress Sarah wore, the braids in her hair. You work hard, learn fast, show respect. A faint smile touched her lips. Little Feather says your Comanche improves. High praise from a demanding teacher. Sarah smiled despite her anxiety. The boy's serious dedication to correcting her pronunciation had become a highlight of her days. I would miss him, miss you. Topsana sat beside her. My mother told stories of her early days with the tribe, said at first she cried every night for white family, then one day realized she had not cried for many moons, said heart finds new home when mind stops fighting. The insight resonated with Sarah. She had stopped thinking constantly of her burned homestead and had ceased measuring everything against her old life. The rhythms of the camp had become familiar, comforting in their predictability. What happens? At council? She asked. They decide whether to leave tomorrow or wait for a better sign, Topsana explained. Or whether to send warriors to watch rangers or avoid them completely. She gave Sarah a significant look. And what to do with you? Before Sarah could respond, sounds of commotion arose from the center of camp. Voices raised in alarm, the pounding of approaching hoofbeats. Topsana rose swiftly, moving to the teepee entrance. Her body tensed as she looked outside. Riders come fast, she said urgently. From the south, not our hunting party. Sarah joined her at the entrance. In the fading evening light, she could see warriors rushing to defensive positions while women gathered children and moved them toward the back of the camp. A sentry on a nearby rise was making rapid hand signals to those below. What's happening? Sarah asked, heart racing. Topsana's expression was grim. Raiders. Maybe Tonkawa or Wichita scouts working for the army. She grabbed Sarah's arm. Come, not safe here at the edge of camp. They hurried toward the center of the village where other women and children were gathering in the largest teepee. As they crossed the open ground, Sarah caught sight of riders cresting the ridge to the south, perhaps a dozen men moving fast, silhouetted against the sunset sky. Quanah emerged from the council teepee, immediately taking charge of the camp's defense. Warriors mounted quickly, forming a protective line between the approaching riders and the camp. Women who weren't shepherding children prepared weapons, bows, lances, old muskets kept for emergencies. In the midst of the chaos, Sarah made a decision. Rather than following Topsana to the central tipi, she turned toward their dwelling instead. "Sarah!" Topsana called after her. "Where are you going?" "To help," Sarah called back, continuing toward their tipi. Inside, she retrieved the knife Quanah had given her, securing it at her waist. Then she grabbed the old pistol she had taken from Wade's man in the Ghost Canyon, the weapon Topsana had shown her how to clean and maintain, though ammunition was scarce. When she emerged, the camp was a flurry of defensive activity. The approaching riders had split into smaller groups, circling widely as though preparing to attack from multiple directions, a common raiding tactic. Quanah was shouting orders, positioning warriors to cover all approaches. Sarah ran to where several women were distributing weapons. The tall woman looked surprised to see her, but handed her a small bow and a quiver of arrows without comment. "I want to help defend the camp," Sarah said in her still imperfect Comanche. The older woman studied her for a moment, then nodded sharply. "Stand with us," she replied in the same language. "Prove your heart." The women formed a second defensive ring inside the warriors' perimeter, creating a fallback position to protect the children if the outer defenses failed. Sarah took her place among them, nocking an arrow as she had been taught during hunting lessons. As darkness fell fully, the first shots rang out from the southern edge of the camp. The raiders had initiated their attack, using the cover of night. To approach closer, warriors returned fire, the crack of rifles echoing across the valley. Sarah felt fear coiling in her stomach, but forced it down, focusing instead on watching her assigned sector, as Stan's tall woman had instructed. This was not her first experience with violence. She had defended her homestead against wolves and two-legged predators before, but the organized nature of this attack was different, more terrifying. The raiders pressed forward on the eastern side, apparently finding a weakness in the defenses there. 3 figures broke through the warrior line, galloping toward the camp center. Without hesitation, Sarah drew her bow and fired as they approached. Her arrow missed, but those from more experienced women found their marks. 2 raiders fell. The third wheeled his horse and retreated. "Good," Stan's tall woman called to her. "Next time, breathe first, then release." The skirmish continued for what felt like hours, but was likely less than 30 minutes. The raiders, finding the camp better defended than they had anticipated, eventually withdrew into the darkness, taking their wounded with them. Signals passed among the Comanche warriors as they maintained vigilance, wary of a second attack. When it became clear the immediate danger had passed, Quanah called for a damage assessment. 2 warriors had sustained injuries, one a bullet graze across the shoulder, another a more serious wound to the leg. Miraculously, no one had been killed. The entire camp remained on alert through the night, rotating watches to maintain constant surveillance. Sarah stayed with the women's defensive line until midnight, when Topsana found her and insisted she arrest. "You fought alongside Comanche women," Topsana observed as they returned to their teepee, which now had additional occupants, 2 grandmothers and several children whose dwelling had been damaged in the attack. "I couldn't hide while others defended me," Sarah replied simply. Topsana nodded, understanding. "Tonight changes things. Some who doubted will doubtless now." In the crowded teepee, Sarah found a small space to curl up, her bow still within reach. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully, interrupted by the sounds of ongoing vigilance outside. Hushed conversations, the occasional whinny of a nervous horse, the quiet commands of warriors maintaining the watch. By dawn, the camp was already in motion. The council had made its decision during the night. They would depart immediately for the winter grounds, traveling fast and light. The raid had confirmed the increasing danger of remaining so close to areas patrolled by rangers and their native allies. As Sarah helped Topsana and the other women dismantle their tipi and pack the remaining belongings, Quanah approached. He carried something wrapped in soft leather. "You stood with our women last night," he said without preamble, "faced raiders without fear." "I was afraid," Sarah admitted. "But this is my home now too. I needed to defend it." Something shifted. In Quana's expression, approval, perhaps, or recognition. "Council decided about you during the night." He handed her the leather bundle. "This belongs to you now." Sarah unwrapped the package carefully. Inside lay a beautifully crafted knife with a bone handle carved with symbols she recognized from her language lessons. Protection, strength, endurance. The blade bore subtle etching that caught the morning light. "This is," she began, stunned by the gift's quality and obvious significance. "Warrior's knife," Quana finished, "not given lightly, means you walk with us to winter grounds, not as guests or strangers, but as one beginning path to becoming Numunu." The implication was profound. This wasn't merely permission to accompany the tribe. It was the first step toward potential. Acceptance as one of them. "The path is long," Quana cautioned, seeing her expression. "Many tests still come. Many will still doubt. But you have earned the right to try." Sarah's fingers closed around the knife, feeling the weight of both the weapon and the responsibility it represented. "Thank you," she said in Comanche. "I will honor this trust." Quana nodded once, then turned to rejoin the warriors, preparing for departure. Topsana approached, having witnessed the exchange from nearby. "Now you carry a Comanche blade," she observed. "Marks beginning of new story." Sarah secured the knife at her waist alongside the one Quana had given her during their flight through the ghost canyons. "Will the people ever truly accept me?" she asked softly. Topsana considered the question as they worked together to load their belongings onto a travois. "My mother became Comanche in heart, though skin remained white. Some called her Nadwa, she who has been found." She gave Sarah a measured look. "Perhaps one day they will find a name for you too." Within hours, the entire camp had been dismantled, loaded onto horses and travois, leaving little evidence of their presence beyond fire circles and trampled grass. As the people moved out in a long column heading northeast toward their traditional winter grounds, Sarah rode not at the edges of the group as before, but among the women and warriors of Quana's band. Behind her lay the burning home that had marked the end of one life. Ahead lay an uncertain future among people who had been strangers, but were slowly becoming something else. Maybe not yet family, but no longer enemies. As they crossed a rise that would take them out of sight of the abandoned campsite, Sarah glanced back one final time. In the distance, dust clouds marked the approach of riders from the west, rangers perhaps, or army scouts following reports of the previous night's skirmish. They were too late. By the time they reached the site, the Comanche would be miles away, moving through lands the white men had not yet mapped, wilderness that remained free for at least one more season. Sarah turned her face forward, focusing on the path ahead as the paint mare carried her deeper into Comancheria. The knife at her waist was a constant reminder of her choice, not just to flee what was behind, but to move purposefully toward what awaited. The journey to the winter grounds lasted 6 days, following ancient paths known only to the Comanche. They traveled through landscapes Sarah had never imagined existed in Texas. Hidden valleys carved by long-vanished rivers, forests of stunted oak that clung to rocky slopes, vast grasslands where pronghorn antelope bounded away at their approach. Each night they made camp in different locations, always with sentries posted and horses kept close. By the 3rd day, Sarah's body had adjusted to the rhythm of travel. The pain in her thighs dulled to a manageable ache, and she found herself able to ride for hours without the bone-deep exhaustion that had plagued her initially. Topsana noticed the change with approval. "You sit horse better now," she observed as they dismounted at the evening camp. "Less like a sack of flour, more like Comanche." Sarah smiled at the backhanded compliment. "My backside, thank you for noticing." Their destination revealed itself on the 7th morning, a sheltered basin nestled between low mountains with a clear stream running through its center. Ancient cottonwoods and willows lined the watercourse, providing both shelter and building materials. The basin's natural contours created protection from winter winds while capturing the southern sun's warmth. Mahueto, Topsana named it, hidden water place. The camp sprang to life with practiced efficiency as families claimed traditional locations and began erecting winter lodges. Unlike the temporary teepees they had used at the summer camp, these structures were more substantial, larger, and reinforced to withstand the cold season. Some families constructed wooden frameworks covered with hides, while others utilized existing caves and rock overhangs, enhancing them with woven screens and hide walls. Quanah's band settled in a prime location near the center of the basin. Sarah helped Topsana and the other women construct their winter dwelling, a spacious lodge built against a natural rock wall that would reflect the heat of their fire through cold nights. "More room here than summer camp," Topsana explained as they worked. "Stay longer in one place during winter moon times." The next weeks passed in a blur of activity as the entire community prepared for the coming cold. Hunting parties brought in deer, elk, and even a few buffalo from a small herd they encountered on the plains beyond the basin. The meat was carefully preserved, some smoked, some dried into pemmican, some stored in underground caches where the cool earth would keep it from spoiling. Sarah found her role expanding as her skills proved valuable. Her knowledge of preserving roots merged with Comanche techniques to create efficient methods of storing the abundant wild berries, plums, and persimmons they gathered. Her experience with vegetable gardening translated to identifying and collecting wild plant foods that others might have overlooked. "You have good eyes for growing things," stands tall. Woman commented one day as they dug wild onions and prairie turnips. "See what others miss." The old woman had become something of a mentor to Sarah, teaching her medicines and crafts with gruff patience. Under her guidance, Sarah learned to identify healing plants, to prepare poultices and teas for various ailments, to weave watertight baskets from reeds and grasses. Winter arrived subtly at first. Cooler nights, changing leaves, geese flying. Overhead, in V formations. Then came the first frost, glistening on the grass one morning, gone by midday, but a harbinger of what approached. The people's preparations intensified. Sarah's Comanche improved steadily through daily practice. She could now hold simple conversations without resorting to gestures, could understand most daily instructions, could even tell and comprehend basic stories during evening gatherings. Little Feather continued his role as her most demanding teacher, but now other children joined him, competing to teach the white woman new words and phrases. With language came deeper understanding. Sarah began to grasp the complex social structure of the tribe, how decisions were made collectively yet with respect for proven leaders, how personal autonomy was balanced with community responsibility, how religious beliefs infused every aspect of daily life without the rigid doctrines she had known in settler churches. During this period of relative peace, it was sometimes possible to forget the dangers that had driven them to this hidden place. But reminders came regularly. Reports from scouts who maintained surveillance of the territories they had abandoned, news brought by occasional traders from other tribes, warnings in the form of distant smoke signals visible from the basin's rim. 2 months after their arrival at the winter grounds, those dangers suddenly intensified. The alarm came at dawn, 3 fast riders approaching from the southeast, pushing their horses hard despite the treacherous terrain. The camp mobilized instantly, warriors forming defensive positions while women gathered children into protected central areas. Sarah joined Topsana and Stan's tall woman, helping to distribute weapons and prepare emergency provisions in case evacuation became necessary. Quanah met the riders at the basin's entrance. Sarah watched from a distance as he conversed intensely with the lead horseman. The chief's posture told her everything, back stiffening, hand moving to his knife hilt, head turning sharply toward the camp's heart. When Quanah strode toward the central gathering area, his expression was graver than Sarah had ever seen it. He called for the council's immediate assembly, then, surprisingly, gestured for Sarah to join them. "You should hear this," he said simply when she hesitated. "Concerns you too." Inside the council lodge, Sarah took a place against the wall, conscious of the extraordinary nature of her inclusion. As a woman and an outsider, her presence at such a meeting was unprecedented. The other council members glanced at her with expressions ranging from acceptance to suspicion, but no one objected. Quanah introduced the messengers, warriors from a Comanche band that wintered further south. Their leader, a weathered man named Striking Snake, stood to deliver his news directly. "Army soldiers everywhere now," he reported in Comanche, which Quanah translated in low tones for Sarah. "Not just rangers, bluecoats with cannons, building a new fort on the Red River. Say they protect settlers, but place soldiers on hunting grounds near water sources." This was concerning, but not unexpected. The army had been pushing further into Comancheria for years, establishing forts that served as bases for further encroachment. What came next, however, struck like lightning. "They hunt specific Comanche bands," Striking Snake continued. "Quanah's band offer reward for information. Say Quanah's people attacked settlers, burned farms, took white women captive." A murmur ran through the council. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face as Striking Snake pulled a folded paper from his pouch and handed it to Quanah. The chief studied it, his expression darkening, then passed it to Sarah. It was a wanted poster, crudely printed but clear. Enough. At the top, bold letters proclaimed 500 reward for information leading to recovery of Sarah Blackwood, widow, kidnapped by hostile Comanche. Below was a rough description of her: height, build, distinctive red hair, alongside an even rougher sketch that barely resembled her but emphasized her pale skin and European features. More chilling was the second part of the notice: $1,000. Reward for capture of Comanche leader Quanah Parker, responsible for burning of Blackwood homestead and murder of Texas citizens. Sarah's hands trembled as she read the blatant lies. "This is Wade's doing," she said to Quanah. "He's twisted everything, made it seem I was taken by force, that you attacked without provocation." Quanah nodded grimly. "Wade has friends in the army now, supplies their fort, sells them beef cattle. His word against disappeared women." Horseback spoke up, his weathered face creased with concern. "How many soldiers?" "2 companies at least," Striking Snake replied. "Maybe 100 men, 6 cannons, Wichita scouts leading them." The council erupted in urgent discussion. 100. Trained soldiers with artillery represented a threat unlike any they had faced before. Previous conflicts had been with smaller ranger units or militia groups, dangerous but not overwhelming. This was different. "They know we winter here?" Horseback asked the critical question. Striking Snake shook his head. "Not the exact place, but search all basins in these hills. Found empty skull camp 2 days ago. Abandoned last moon, but they follow trails, getting closer." Sarah listened with growing horror. A military expedition of this size wouldn't be searching just for her. They would use her kidnapping as justification for a broader campaign against the Comanche, pushing them further from traditional territories, confining them to smaller areas where buffalo grew scarce, and starvation would eventually force surrender, and it was happening because of her presence. She stood, drawing all eyes in the council. "This is because of me," she said in Comanche, slowly but clearly so all could understand. "I should leave. Go to soldiers. Tell the truth." A warrior named Black Knife scoffed. "Truth means nothing to bluecoats. They want war. You are the reason. If not you, they find another. Black Knife speaks wisdom, Horseback agreed. Army uses white woman's story to cover true purpose, clearing Comanche from hunting grounds, pushing us north into Kiowa lands where tribes will fight each other for scarce food. Quanah had remained silent, listening to the council's discourse. Now he spoke, his voice quiet but carrying an authority that silenced all others. Sarah Blackwood chose to ride with us freely, fought beside our women, learn our ways. He looked directly at her. But choice always remains. If you wish to return to your people, no one will stop you. The sincerity of the offer touched Sarah deeply. Despite the danger her presence created, Quanah was still honoring her agency, her right, to determine her own path. "The whites are not my people anymore," she replied steadily. "Not after what Wade did, not after what I've seen and learned here." She addressed the entire council. "I will stay and help however I can, unless my presence puts children at risk. Then I will go, but not to surrender, to draw soldiers away." Her declaration was met with solemn nods from several council members. Even Black Knife, who had been among the most skeptical of her integration into the tribe, inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement of her courage. Horseback turned the discussion to practical matters. "We cannot fight 100 soldiers with cannons, must move camp." "Where?" another elder questioned. "Winter comes, snow already in northern passes. Game grows scarce everywhere." "South," suggested Black Knife. "Into Mexico lands. Mexican soldiers." "There," countered another warrior. "Different enemies, same danger." The debate continued as options were evaluated and discarded. The Comanche's traditional strategy, splitting into smaller bands that could move quickly and reunite later, was complicated by winter conditions and the army's use of native scouts who could track even the most careful bands. Throughout the discussion, Sarah remained silent, her mind racing. Something about the situation nagged at her, a detail from the wanted poster perhaps, or something striking Snake had mentioned. Suddenly, it clicked. "The new fort," she interrupted, drawing surprised looks. "On the Red River. You said they're building it now." Striking Snake nodded. "Walls rising, not finished yet. And Wade is supplying them with beef cattle from his ranch." Again the messenger nodded. Sarah turned to Quanah. "Wade's entire operation depends on controlling the water rights in our valley, my valley. That's why he wanted my land so desperately. His cattle need access to the creek during drought months." Her mind worked rapidly. If he's provisioning the fort, he's stretched thin, driving cattle north while also managing his home territory. Quanah considered this information. "What are you suggesting?" "His ranch would be vulnerable," Sarah explained. "Fewer men to guard it. And if something disrupted his ability to fulfill army contracts, the soldiers would be forced to seek supplies elsewhere, perhaps send detachments back to established settlements." A slow smile spread across Black Knife's face as he grasped her meaning. "Raid Wade's ranch, take his cattle, burn his buildings. The army loses supplies, loses trust in Wade." "Not his buildings," Sarah corrected firmly. "No need to match his. A cruelty. But his cattle, his horses, yes, drive them far away, scatter them. Without them, he loses his leverage with the army, loses his income, loses his power." The horse stroked his chin thoughtfully. "Bold plan, dangerous. Wade Ranch well guarded, even with fewer men." "But unexpected," Quanah noted. "They look for us north and east, not south, not back toward settlements." He studied the rough map another warrior had drawn on the dirt floor. "Could work. Small party, fast horses, strike quickly and vanish." The council debated the proposal vigorously. Some argued it was too risky, that it would only intensify the army's campaign. Others saw the strategic value in disrupting the supply line and diverting military attention. Eventually, a compromise emerged. The main camp would relocate deeper into the basin's western reaches, using caves and camouflage shelters that would be nearly impossible for outsiders to detect. Meanwhile, a small war party led by Quanah would strike Wade's ranch, not to destroy but to disrupt, taking livestock, disabling wagons, creating confusion that would ripple through the military supply chain. Sarah listened as the details were finalized, a strange mixture of emotions churning within her. The ranch they would target lay less than 5 miles from the charred remains of her own homestead. The thought of returning to that place, even fleetingly, filled her with dread and determination in equal measure. As the council dispersed to begin preparations, Quanah approached her. "You do not have to join this raid," he said quietly. "Stay. With camp. Safer." Sarah shook her head. "I know Wade's operation better than anyone. The layout, the routines, where he keeps his best stock. I need to go." Quanah studied her face. "This is not about knowledge only. It's about facing a man who tried to destroy you." "Yes," Sarah admitted, seeing no point in denial. "It's both. I need to do this, Quanah, not for revenge, but to finish what began when you cut me free from that post." The chief nodded, understanding. "Then you ride with a war party. But remember, the goal is to weaken Wade, not kill him. Dead man becomes a martyr, ruined man becomes a warning." The preparation for both the camp's relocation and the raid took 3 days of intense activity. The war party would consist of 12 warriors chosen for their riding skill and fighting prowess, plus Sarah. Their plan required speed, stealth, and precise timing. They would travel south by night, using routes even Wichita scouts rarely traversed, strike at dawn when the ranch hands were just beginning their day, then scatter in multiple directions before regrouping at a predetermined location. During these preparations, Sarah felt a transformation occurring within her that went beyond the physical changes of the past months. She found herself thinking, like a Comanche warrior, considering angles of approach, escape routes, methods of creating confusion without unnecessary bloodshed. The tactical discussions around the fire each night revealed warfare as practiced by the people, not the brutal savagery depicted in settler stories, but a disciplined, strategic approach with clear objectives and rules of engagement. "Comanche raid is not the same as white man war," Black Knife explained during one planning session. "Not about killing all enemies, about showing strength, taking what is needed, preserving your own warriors." Counting coup, Sarah nodded, recalling what she had learned about the practice of touching enemies in battle, an act considered more honorable than killing. "Yes, brave warrior touches enemy, leaves mark, returns unharmed, shows greater skill than one who only kills from distance." This perspective challenged everything Sarah had been taught about Indian warfare. The Comanche certainly could be a deadly opponents. She'd witnessed their lethal efficiency during the encounter with Wade's men. But their approach to conflict was more nuanced than settlers understood, balancing pragmatic needs with cultural values. Topsana helped Sarah prepare, clearly concerned but supportive. She braided Sarah's now longer auburn hair tightly against her head, then showed her how to apply the dark earth pigments that would camouflage her pale skin, a necessary precaution both for the journey and the raid itself. "Wade men see white women with Comanche. They shoot first," Topsana explained as she mixed the pigments. "This hides you from a distance." As Topsana worked, she sang softly, a melody Sarah had heard women sing when preparing their men for hunting expeditions or warfare. The simple act conveyed acceptance that Sarah had not expected to feel so deeply. "What does the song mean?" she asked when Topsana paused. "Prayer for a safe journey," the Comanche woman translated. "Ask spirits to blind enemy eyes, to make your feet swift, your hands steady." She applied the last of the earth mixture to Sarah's forehead. "Songs not usually for women who ride to battle, but you are not a normal woman. The observation carried no judgment, merely acknowledgement of Sarah's unique position within the tribe. Neither fully Comanche nor white anymore, she existed in a space between worlds that allowed her to move in ways others could not. Sarah spent the afternoon checking her weapons and gear, appreciating the practical design of Comanche equipment. Everything served multiple purposes. Nothing wasted weight or space. Her knife sheaths were positioned for quick access, her quiver designed to protect arrows while allowing silent retrieval, her small collection of useful items, flint, twine, medicinal herbs, packed securely in a pouch that wouldn't rattle during stealthy movement. The night before their departure, Stan's tall woman summoned Sarah to her lodge. The elder had not attended the council meeting, but had clearly been informed of the plan. Without preamble, she handed Sarah a small leather pouch. "Medicine," she explained, "for protection, for clear thinking when fear comes." Sarah accepted the gift with appropriate solemnity. "Thank you, grandmother." She had begun using the respectful title recently, and the old woman had not corrected her. "I will use it wisely." Stan's tall woman's weathered hand reached out, touching Sarah's cheek in a rare gesture of affection. "You go to face old ghosts," she said. "Remember, ghosts cannot harm living women unless she gives them power." The insight struck Sarah deeply. Wade had already taken everything material from her home, her land, her connection to settler society. But he hadn't taken her spirit, her capacity to build a new life, her ability to form new bonds. Those things remained hers alone. "I won't give him that power," she promised. Stan's tall woman nodded, satisfied, then reached for something wrapped in soft deerskin. "One more thing." She unwrapped the bundle to reveal a knife, smaller than a hunting blade, but exquisitely crafted, with a handle of polished bone inlaid, with tiny turquoise fragments. "Woman's knife," the elder explained, "for close fighting, hide in sleeves, in hair, under dress." She demonstrated how the sheath could be secured in various concealed positions. "Man expects women to be unarmed. Surprise is an advantage." Sarah recognized the significance of the gift. This was no ordinary tool, but a family heirloom, something passed through generations of Comanche women. "I can't accept this," she said softly. "It should go to your daughter or granddaughter." The tall woman shook her head firmly. "My daughters walk the spirit road now, killed by blue-coat soldiers many winters ago." Her eyes, roomy with age but still sharp with intelligence, held Sarah's gaze. "Knife chooses who carries it next." "Knife chooses you." There was no arguing with such certainty. Sarah accepted the blade, testing its perfect balance in her palm. "I will honor its history," she promised. "And yours." The elder nodded once, then turned back to the medicines she had been preparing before Sarah's arrival, a clear dismissal. But as Sarah reached the lodge entrance, Stan's tall woman spoke once more. "When you face Wade Man, remember, revenge fills hand with smoke, justice fills hands with strength." She didn't look up from her work. "Choose wisely which you grasp." The war party departed under cover of darkness, slipping away from the winter camp as silently as shadows. Sarah rode near the center of the group, her paint mare moving confidently, through terrain that would have seemed impossible to navigate in her former life. Months of learning from the Comanche had transformed not just her riding abilities, but her entire way of perceiving the landscape. She now recognized landmarks invisible to untrained eyes, understood how to move with, rather than against, the land's natural contours. They followed creek beds where water had eroded paths through the hills, traversed high ridges where sentries could detect any pursuit, utilized ancient game trails known only to those who had hunted these lands for generations. The journey required crossing regions Sarah had never known existed, despite living nearby for years. Hidden valleys, concealed passes, networks of caves that provided shelter during daylight hours when they rested. Quanah set a grueling pace, pushing both horses and riders to their limits. No one complained. Each warrior understood the narrow timing window their plan required. They needed to strike Wade's ranch precisely as routine activities began, but before full daylight exposed their movements. During their brief rest periods, the warriors maintained the disciplined focus Sarah had come to recognize as characteristic of Comanche fighters. They checked weapons without being told, tended to horses with meticulous care, ate sparingly of the dried provisions they carried. Conversation was minimal and purposeful, clarifying aspects of the plan, sharing observations about terrain or weather conditions, occasionally relating relevant experiences from previous raids. Sarah found herself fully accepted within this elite group, not as an honorary male, but as a warrior in her own right. Her opinions were sought regarding Wade's operation. Her suggestions about approach routes were considered seriously. The respect wasn't granted from charity or Quanah's influence, but earned through her demonstrated commitment and knowledge. By the second night, they entered territory Sarah recognized, the hills and valleys surrounding her former home. Emotions surged as familiar landmarks appeared in the moonlight, but she channeled these feelings into sharper focus rather than allowing them to become distractions. They traversed a ridge that offered a distant view of where her homestead had stood. In the pale moonlight, Sarah could just make out the dark shape of the charred cabin. She allowed herself one brief moment of acknowledgement, a silent farewell to that chapter of her life, before turning her attention forward again. Quanah, riding beside her, noticed the moment. "Old home," he observed quietly. "Old life," Sarah corrected. "Just a place now." The chief nodded, approval evident in his expression. "Good. Past is a shadow. Present needs clear eyes." They reached the outskirts of Wade's property shortly after. Midnight, on the third night, the war party established a temporary camp in a densely wooded ravine that offered concealment while allowing scouts to survey the ranch's current operations. 2 warriors with exceptional night vision were sent to gather intelligence on guard positions, livestock locations, and any changes to the layout Sarah had described. While waiting for their return, the remaining warriors made final preparations, checking weapons one last time, applying war paint in patterns specific to each individual's medicine, securing loose equipment that might create noise during the approach. Sarah observed that each man had his own rituals. Some prayed quietly, others sang almost inaudibly. A few sat in complete stillness, gathering inner strength. She found her own preparation becoming a blend of her old and new selves. She checked her pistol methodically as Tom had taught her years before, but also touched the medicine pouch at her neck while visualizing successful outcomes as Stan's tall woman had instructed. She adjusted the concealed knife in her sleeve using the Elder's technique, but also said a fragment of the Lord's Prayer that had sustained her through difficult times at her homestead. The scouts returned 2 hours before dawn, reporting details that confirmed most of Sarah's intelligence, while noting a few significant changes. "More guards than usual," reported Wolfeye, the more experienced of the 2 scouts. 3 men walking on the perimeter instead of the usual 1 or 2. "Wade himself is there," added the second scout. "Saw him on the porch with the foreman, giving orders. Seemed angry." This news rippled through the war party. Wade's presence complicated matters. He would recognize Sarah instantly if he saw her, even with disguising paint. But it also presented an opportunity to deliver their message directly to the source of the trouble. Quanah called the warriors into a tight circle for final instructions. Using a stick, he drew a rough map of Wade's ranch in the dirt, then added, "The new guard positions based on the scouts' information. Sarah Blackwood knows this place," he said, nodding toward her. "She will guide us." The warriors turned to her with expressions of focused attention. This was not the skepticism she had once faced, but the respect accorded to someone with valuable knowledge. Sarah knelt beside Quanah's drawing, adding details from her memory and the fresh intelligence. "The main house sits here, on the rise," she explained in Comanche, her fingers tracing the location. "Wade's office is on the east side. He keeps cash and papers there. Bunkhouse here, where ranch hands sleep. Horse corrals behind the barn, with prime mounts kept separately in these smaller pens." She continued detailing the layout, noting where guards would likely be posted, which buildings contained valuable supplies, which pastures held the best cattle, the prime beef destined for the army fort. Throughout her explanation, the warriors listened intently, committing every detail to memory. "Wagons?" asked Black Knife. "For disabling?" 3 large freight wagons stored in the wagon shed beside the barn, Sarah confirmed. "Wade uses them to transport cattle to the fort. Without wheels, without harnesses, they're useless." She paused, thinking strategically. "The axle pins can be removed quickly and carried away. Without them, repairs take days." Black Knife nodded approval of this specific detail, a small component that would render large equipment useless while requiring minimal effort to sabotage. As they finalized the plan, Quanah assigned warriors to specific tasks based on their unique skills. 2 exceptional horsemen would drive off the best breeding cattle. 3 others would focus on gathering Wade's prized horses, particularly those trained for cattle driving. 2 would create a diversion on the far side of the ranch while the main action occurred. The rest would target supplies and equipment, disabling what they couldn't take. "What about Wade himself?" asked a young warrior named Running Fox. "Kill him." The question hung in the air. Sarah felt every eye turned toward her, awaiting her response. The decision seemed to have been deliberately left open, perhaps as a test of her character, perhaps as recognition of her right to determine her enemy's fate. She thought of Wade ordering his men to tie her to the post, forcing her to watch her home burn. She thought of his casual cruelty, his greed, his willingness to sacrifice others for his ambitions. For a brief moment, she imagined the satisfaction of seeing him experience the same fear he had inflicted on her. Then, the tall woman's words returned to her. "Revenge fills hand with smoke. Justice fills hands with strength. No killing unless absolutely necessary," she said firmly. "Not even Wade, especially not Wade." She met each warrior's gaze in turn. Dead, he becomes a martyr. His lies about savage Comanche attacking innocent settlers become truth in white men's eyes. She pointed to the map. "But alive, watching us take his wealth, unable to stop us, he loses standing among his own kind. His weakness becomes known. That is better punishment." Quanah's expression remained impassive, but something like approval flickered in his eyes. "Sarah Blackwood speaks wisdom," he said. "We take what moves, disable what remains, leave Wade with his life, but not his pride." His dark eyes scanned the circle. "And we leave marks so everyone knows who struck him." The warriors nodded understanding. Such raids were part of Comanche tradition, demonstrations of power and skill rather than exercises in destruction. The goal was not to annihilate an enemy, but to humble him, to show his vulnerability, to undermine his standing among his own people. As they prepared to move out for the final approach, Quanah drew Sarah aside. "You stay with me," he instructed. "Do not separate." She nodded, grateful for his protection, but determined to pull her weight. "I won't be a burden." "Not about burden," Quanah clarified. "About knowing how seeing an old enemy affects the mind. Even the strongest warrior can lose focus when facing a man who caused great pain." Sarah understood his concern. Despite her insistence that revenge wasn't her motivation, she couldn't deny the emotional storm brewing within her as they neared Wade's ranch. The man had taken everything from her, had left her to die while watching her life's work turn to ash. If she came face to face with him during the raid, could she maintain the discipline their plan required? "I'll stay focused," she promised. "The mission matters more than my feelings." Quanah seemed satisfied with her answer. He checked her weapons, the two visible knives secured at her waist, the hidden blade from Stan's tall woman concealed in her sleeve, the small bow slung across her back, the pistol with its precious few bullets reserved for emergency. Finally, he touched two fingers to the earth paint that camouflaged her face. "No longer Sarah Blackwood of Settler Cabin," he said quietly. "Today, you ride a Comanche." The words settled into her bones with surprising weight, not a burden but a foundation. She had not sought this path, had not imagined such a transformation when she'd first seen Comanche warriors silhouetted against the dawn as her home burned. Yet here she was, preparing to raid the man who had driven her from one life into another. The war party moved out, approaching Wade's ranch from the west, where the terrain offered concealment almost to the edge of the property. They reached the final tree line an hour before dawn, settling into observation positions to confirm the ranch's activities matched their intelligence. Sarah crouched beside Quanah, surveying the ranch layout with a trained warrior's eye. Their position in the tree line offered excellent visibility while keeping them hidden in the pre-dawn shadows. A faint glow on the eastern horizon promised daylight within the hour, perfect timing for their plan. Wade's ranch sprawled across. The valley, much larger than Sarah's modest homestead had been. The main house stood imperiously on a small rise, a two-story structure with a wide porch and glass windows imported at great expense from Dallas. Behind it stretched the operational buildings, a large barn, bunkhouse, smokehouse, blacksmiths, shop, and various storage structures. Corrals held horses visible even in the dim light, their value evident in their muscled forms and alert postures. Beyond the immediate compound, cattle dotted the pastures, prime beef stock that represented Wade's wealth and power. Sarah's gaze drifted northward to where her own land lay, just beyond a line of hills. From this distance, she couldn't see the charred remains of her cabin, but the knowledge of its proximity stirred complicated emotions. She pushed them down, focusing instead on the tactical considerations before them. "More guards than usual," she whispered to Quanah, noting armed men positioned at key points around the property. "Wade must be nervous." Quanah nodded, his expression calculating. "Good. Nervous men make mistakes." Movement near the bunkhouse caught their attention. Ranch hands emerging, stretching, heading toward the cookhouse where breakfast would be prepared. Before the day's work began, Sarah counted 8 men, plus the 3 guards they'd already identified. 11 in total, close to what she had estimated during their planning. "Morning routine is the same as you described," Blackknife observed from her other side. "Cook fire starting, men gather for food, horses not yet saddled." Sarah nodded. Wade ran his operation with military precision, a routine that rarely varied, a predictability they could exploit. Foremen will assign daily tasks after breakfast. That's when they're most distracted. Quanah made a series of hand signals to the warriors spread along the tree line, confirming the plan was proceeding. 2 mounted fighters broke away, circling wide to the north, where they would create a diversion at the critical moment. Sarah felt her heartbeat quicken as the first true light of dawn illuminated the ranch. This was really happening. She was about to participate in a Comanche raid against the man who had destroyed her former life. The irony wasn't lost on her. 6 months ago, she would have been terrified by the very scenario she now embraced. A low bird call, not from any bird, signaled that the diversion team was in position. Quanah turned to her. "Ready?" he asked simply. Sarah touched the medicine pouch Stan's tall woman had given her, then nodded. "Ready?" Quanah raised his hand, then dropped it sharply, the signal to begin. With practiced silence, the warriors separated into their assigned groups. The raid had begun. The raid unfolded with the fluid precision of a well-rehearsed dance. From her position alongside Quanah, Sarah watched the warriors execute their assignments with breathtaking efficiency. One moment, the ranch compound was peaceful in the dawn light. The next, it erupted into calculated chaos. The diversion came first, a series of rifle shots and war cries from the northern ridge, drawing the attention of the guards and sending them rushing in that direction. With the perimeter weakened, the main party struck. Warriors converged on the horse corrals, cutting fence lines and driving the valuable animals into a controlled stampede eastward. Others targeted the cattle, selecting the prime breeding stock with expert eyes and separating them from the herd. Inside the compound, Black Knife led a small group toward the equipment sheds. Sarah could see them moving between buildings like shadows, pausing only to disable wagon axles, remove harnesses, and gather any portable tools of value. Watching the coordinated assault, Sarah felt a surge of pride tinged with lingering disbelief. These were the savages settlers feared, men executing a complex military operation with discipline that would impress any army officer, deliberately avoiding bloodshed while achieving their objectives. "Now," Quanah signaled, spurring his horse toward the main house. Sarah followed close behind, her heart hammering against her ribs as they approached the building where Wade would likely be responding to the commotion. They hadn't reached the halfway point when the front door burst open. Jeremiah Wade himself emerged, rifle in hand, flanked by his foreman. Both men froze momentarily at the sight of mounted Comanche warriors in their yard, then raised their weapons. "Down!" Quanah shouted, veering sharply left as a rifle shot cracked. Through the morning air, Sarah followed his maneuver, ducking low over her mare's neck. The bullet passed harmlessly overhead. Before Wade could chamber another round, Quanah had circled behind a water trough, using it as cover while he nocked an arrow. The foreman fired next, his shot going wide as Sarah's mare sidestepped unexpectedly. She drew her pistol, aiming not at the men but at the porch roof above them. Her shot splintered the wood, showering the men with debris and forcing them back toward the doorway. "Sarah?" Wade's voice rang out, incredulous as he caught a glimpse of her face beneath the war paint. Sarah Blackwood. She didn't respond, instead using his moment of confusion to maneuver her horse closer to Quanah's position. The chief had already lost an arrow, not at the men, but at the rifle in Wade's hands. The precision shot struck the weapon's wooden stock, knocking it from the rancher's grasp. Disarmed and exposed, Wade retreated into the house with his foreman, slamming the door behind them. From inside came shouts as they presumably prepared for a siege. But a siege wasn't part of the plan. Quanah made a series of hand signals to warriors positioned around the compound. Within moments, they converged on the main house, not to attack it, but to surround it. This was the culmination of their strategy, to trap Wade inside while they systematically dismantled his operation around him. From their vantage point near the house, Sarah and Quanah could observe the entire raid progressing, exactly as planned. Horses streamed from broken corrals, driven by whooping warriors who guided them toward the eastern foothills. Cattle followed similar paths to the southeast, moving in controlled groups that would be difficult to track and recover. Black Knife emerged from the wagon shed, raising his arm to signal that the equipment sabotage was complete. The raid had been underway for less than 15 minutes, and already Wade's ranch was effectively crippled. Without horses, without cattle, without functional transportation equipment, his operation would grind to a halt. The army contract would go unfulfilled. The loans taken against expected profits would come due without means of repayment. A desperate shot from an upstairs window shattered the momentary calm. The bullet struck ground near Quanah's horse, causing the animal to dance sideways. The chief's expression hardened. "Enough," he said to Sarah. "Time for the last message." He whistled sharply, summoning 3 warriors who carried small bundles wrapped in oilcloth. Sarah recognized the preparation. Fire arrows, a weapon the Comanche used sparingly, but with devastating effect. For a moment, she thought Quanah intended to burn the house with Wade inside, a fitting retribution perhaps, but contrary to everything they had planned. Instead, the chief pointed to specific targets: the empty barn, the wagon shed now stripped of useful components, and the corral gate posts that symbolized Wade's control over livestock. The warriors prepared their arrows, treating the tips with a mixture that would burn hot and fast. At Quanah's signal, they lit and released them in perfect unison. Each arrow found its mark with unerring accuracy. Flames erupted almost instantly, racing along dry wood that hadn't seen rain in months. "No!" Wade's voice bellowed from the house as he witnessed his property burning. The front door crashed open once more as he charged onto the porch, heedless of danger in his desperation. "Stop, you savages!" Sarah urged her mare forward, moving into full view of the porch. She removed her hat, allowing her distinctive red hair to confirm her identity beyond any doubt. Wade stopped mid-stride, his face contorted with rage and disbelief. "You," he spat, "you did this. Turn against your own kind." "My kind?" Sarah's voice carried clearly in the morning air. "My kind doesn't burn women out of their homes. My kind doesn't leave people to die for profit." Wade's eyes darted around, taking in the coordinated destruction of everything he had built. His ranch hands were nowhere to be seen, either fled or secured by warriors elsewhere in the compound. The fires were spreading, though carefully contained to the targeted structures. His cattle and horses were disappearing over the eastern ridge. "The army will hunt you down," he threatened, his voice cracking with impotent fury. "All of you. They'll string you up, and you'll hang right alongside these savages, Sarah. Perhaps," she acknowledged calmly, "but you'll still be ruined. Your name disgraced, your contracts voided, your debts called in." She leaned forward slightly in her saddle. "Was my little piece of land worth all this, Jeremiah?" The question struck him like a physical blow. His face paled as the full implications of his situation became clear. The army would indeed search for those responsible, but they would also question how Wade had allowed such a raid to succeed, how his security had failed so completely, how the woman he had reported kidnapped now rode willingly with the Comanche. "What do you want?" he asked finally, the bluster draining from his voice. Sarah looked to Quanah, who nodded once, giving her the authority to deliver their terms. "First, the truth," she said firmly. "You will tell the rangers and the army that I chose to go with the Comanche after you burned my home and left me to die. You will withdraw all claims that I was kidnapped." Wade's jaw clenched, but he remained silent, listening. "Second, you will abandon all efforts to claim my land," she continued. "The deed remains in my name, and you will sign a statement acknowledging that fact to be delivered to the land office in Dallas." "And if I refuse?" Wade challenged, though his tone lacked conviction. Sarah glanced at the fires now consuming his outbuildings, at his missing livestock, at the warriors who had systematically dismantled his operation in less than half an hour. "Then we return," she said simply. "Not just to your ranch, but to every property you own, every investment, every partnership." Her voice hardened. "The Comanche have a long reach, Jeremiah, longer than you imagine, and a very good memory." The threat hung in the air between them. Wade's gaze shifted from Sarah to Quanah, measuring the chief's resolve and finding no weakness there. Finally, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "I'll do it," he muttered. "But you're still a dead woman if you stay with them. The army won't stop." "Because of one rancher's statement. That's my concern," Sarah replied. "Yours is putting your life back together without destroying others along the way." Quanah made a sharp gesture, and a warrior approached leading Wade's prized stallion, the only horse they had deliberately kept from the driven herd. Tied to the saddle was a leather pouch containing paper, ink, and the legal language Sarah had dictated the night before. "Write it now," she instructed. "Both documents. We'll deliver them to ensure they reach the proper authorities." Under the watchful eyes of mounted warriors, with his ranch burning around him, Jeremiah Wade had no choice but to comply. He wrote the statements as directed, his hand shaking with suppressed rage, and signed each with the precise flourish Sarah remembered from his attempts to purchase her land. When he finished, a warrior collected the documents, securing them carefully in a waterproof pouch. Quanah raised his hand, signaling the raid's completion. Warriors disengaged from their positions around the compound, falling back toward predetermined escape routes. "This isn't over," Wade called after them. A final attempt to salvage his pride. Sarah reined her mare around to face him one last time. "Yes, Jeremiah, it is." She looked him directly in the eyes. "For your sake, pray we never meet again." With that, she wheeled her horse and followed Quanah toward the tree line. The warriors converged from different directions, forming an orderly retreat that would soon split into multiple smaller groups to confuse any pursuit. Behind them, Wade's ranch continued to burn. Not the indiscriminate destruction he had visited upon Sarah's homestead, but the targeted elimination of his ability to project power across the frontier. As they created a ridge that would take them out of sight, Sarah paused for a final look. Smoke rose in black columns against the morning sky. Wade stood alone in his yard, diminished and defeated among the ruins of his ambition. The symmetry was not lost on her. He had forced her to watch as her home burned. Now she had returned. That lesson with interest. "Satisfied?" Quanah asked quietly, drawing his horse alongside hers. Sarah considered the question carefully. The raid had succeeded beyond their expectations. They had struck a significant blow against the man who had wronged her, disrupted the army's supply lines, reclaimed legal ownership of her land, and done it all without a single death. Yet what? She felt wasn't the hot satisfaction of revenge, but something cooler and more enduring. The quiet certainty that justice, delayed but not denied, had finally been served. "Yes," she answered truthfully. "It's finished now." Quanah studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "Good. Looking backward while riding forward leads to falls." He gestured toward the east, where the sun now illuminated their path home. Long journey still ahead. They rode hard for the remainder of the day, following routes even more circuitous than those they had used on their approach. By nightfall, they had joined the warriors driving the captured horses and cattle, consolidating their prizes into manageable groups that would eventually be distributed among the tribe's bands. That night, camped in a sheltered canyon far from any likely pursuit, the raiders celebrated their success with quiet pride. There was none of the raucous boasting Sarah might have expected from white men after such a victory, just the satisfied camaraderie of warriors who had accomplished a difficult mission together. Black Knife approached as she sat beside the small fire, offering her a strip of dried meat. "You rode well," he said, the simple words carrying significant weight coming from him. Steady hands, clear eyes. "Thank you," Sarah replied in Comanche. "Your teaching made it possible." The normally taciturn warrior almost smiled. "Teaching only works when the student listens." He touched the knife at her waist, the one he had helped her learn to use effectively. "You listened better than most." Coming from Black Knife, who had initially been among the most skeptical of her presence among the people, this represented extraordinary acceptance. Sarah recognized it as such, inclining her head respectfully. Later, as the camp settled for the night, Quanah joined her by the fire. For a time they sat in companionable silence, each processing the day's events in their own way. "What will you do now?" he finally asked. with paper claiming your land? It was a question Sarah had been pondering since they'd ridden away from Wade's ranch. Legally, she once again owned the property where she and Tom had built their life together. She could theoretically return and rebuild, start over with. The compensation Wade would eventually be forced to pay, but the world had shifted around her, and within her. The Sarah Blackwood who had worked that land no longer existed. "The land is mine," she said slowly, "but not for me to live on. Not anymore." She stared into the flames, seeing possibilities rather than just memories. Perhaps someday it could be a meeting place, neutral ground where Comanche and settlers might trade without fear. Quanah considered this, nodding thoughtfully. Bold idea, dangerous time for such things, but seeds must be planted before harvest comes. "And you?" Sarah asked. "What happens when we return to winter camp?" The chief's expression grew distant, his gaze fixed on something beyond the present moment. "Soldiers still come, more forts are still built, settlers still push into hunting grounds." He looked at her directly. "World changes whether we wish it or not. Question is how to change it without losing what matters most." She recognized the weight of leadership in his words, the constant balance between preserving his people's way of life and adapting to forces beyond their control. Quanah walked between worlds in ways few could truly understand, carrying the legacy of both his Comanche father and white mother. "Whatever comes," Sarah said quietly, "I ride with the people now." She touched the warrior's knife at her waist, no longer a foreign object, but an extension of her transformed self. "My choice is made." Quanah nodded once, accepting her declaration. Without further comment, they both knew the path ahead would not be easy. The army would continue its campaign regardless of Wade's statements. The frontier was changing inexorably as more settlers pushed westward, as native hunting grounds shrank, as ancient ways collided with the relentless machinery of expansion. But for this moment, in the quiet aftermath of justice served, Sarah Blackwood, no longer quite Sarah, no longer defining herself by the Blackwood name, had found her place in a world that had once sought to destroy her. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the canyon walls. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new adaptations to a changing landscape. Tonight, however, was for honoring what had been accomplished and acknowledging what had been transformed. As Sarah prepared her sleeping furs, she realized she no longer dreamt of her burning cabin, no longer woke with the phantom sensation of ropes cutting into her wrists. Those memories remained, but their power to harm her had diminished, replaced by newer, stronger images, riding alongside warriors, learning from Comanche women, finding her voice in a council lodge, standing her ground against the man who had once seemed invincible. She had not just survived. She had become something Wade could never have imagined when he ordered his men to burn her home and leave her to die. She had become the bridge between worlds that Quanah himself embodied, neither fully white nor fully Comanche, but something new and necessary on a frontier that desperately needed such bridges. With that realization settling into her bones, Sarah drifted into dreamless sleep beneath a canopy of stars that looked down with ancient indifference on the brief, fierce struggles of those who lived and died beneath their gaze. Spring came to Comancheria with a riot of wildflowers carpeting valleys that had lain dormant through the winter months. The hidden basin that had sheltered the people through the coldest season gradually emptied as family groups prepared to disperse for traditional summer hunting and gathering. Teepees came down, travois were loaded, horses readied for the seasonal migration that had defined Comanche life for generations. 6 months had passed since the raid on Wade's ranch. 6 months of relative peace as deep winter snows had temporarily halted the Army's campaign of fort building and patrol. Reports from scouts and traders indicated their actions had achieved the desired effect. Wade's credibility had suffered a crippling blow, the army had been forced to seek alternative supply arrangements, and the land office in Dallas had indeed received the documents acknowledging Sarah's legal ownership of her homestead. But peace would not last. Already, scouts reported new movements from the south. More soldiers, more supplies, more determination to pacify the frontier. The breathing space winter had provided was coming to an end. On the morning of departure, Sarah stood atop a ridge overlooking the basin that had been her home through the cold months. Her appearance had changed significantly since that first day with the people. Her auburn hair, now grown past her shoulders, was braided in the Comanche style with strips of decorated leather woven through the plaits. Her clothing, buckskin dress adorned with quill work, high moccasin boots crafted by her own hands, reflected her adoption of Comanche ways. At her waist hung the two knives that symbolized her journey, Quanah's gift from their first meeting, and Stan's tall woman's ceremonial blade. More profound than these external changes was the transformation within. She moved differently now, with the balanced confidence of someone comfortable in both saddle and silence. She spoke Comanche with growing fluency, dreamed in its cadences, thought in its patterns. The Sarah Blackwood, who had once defined herself by a small plot of land and a settler's cabin, existed now only in memory. Thinking heavy thoughts? The voice belonged to Topsana, who had become more than a mentor or companion, something close to sister during their months of shared living. Sarah turned with a smile. "Remembering," she replied in Comanche, "who I was when I came here, who I've become." Topsana nodded, understanding. "The people have a saying, wolf cannot return to being pup, but remembers what pup learned." "Wise words," Sarah acknowledged. "Though I'm not sure I've become a wolf yet." "No?" Topsana's eyes crinkled with rare humor. "Ask Wade men if you are a wolf or not." The reminder of the successful raid brought a flush of pride. In the months since, Sarah had earned full acceptance among the war society, not as an honorary male but as a woman warrior, a status rare but not unprecedented in Comanche history. She had participated in hunts, learned advanced horsemanship techniques, mastered weapons that had once seemed foreign and frightening. Below them, the camp was in final preparations for departure. Different bands would travel in different directions, some north toward better hunting grounds, others east to traditional gathering sites. Quanah's band, including Sarah, would head southeast, following ancient pathways towards summer grazing lands. "Time to go," Topsana observed, turning back toward the trail that would take them to the gathering point. "Long journey today." Sarah lingered a moment longer, committing the view to memory. This place had sheltered her during the most profound transformation of her life. Whatever the future held, this hidden basin would remain sacred in her personal geography. As she descended toward camp, Sarah passed Stan's tall woman supervising the loading of medicinal plants onto a travois. The elder acknowledged her with a nod, then beckoned her closer. "Something for you," she said, pressing a small object wrapped in soft hide into Sarah's palm. "Made during winter moons." Sarah unwrapped the gift carefully. Inside lay a carved bone pendant suspended on a braided leather cord. The carving depicted a woman mounted on horseback, bow raised, hair streaming behind her, an unmistakable representation of Sarah herself during the raid. "Grandmother," she breathed, genuinely moved by the unexpected gift. "It's beautiful." "Not just beautiful," the old woman corrected. "Medicine. Protection." She tapped the carving with one gnarled finger. "Shows who you truly are now. Wear always." Sarah slipped the cord over her head, feeling the pendant settle against her heart. Coming from Stan's tall woman, traditional, reserved, initially skeptical of the white woman in their midst, this represented a profound acknowledgement of belonging. "I will honor it," she promised. The elder nodded once, then returned to her. Work, outward demonstrations of affection being rare among the people. But the gift spoke volumes that words could not. An elder crafting a medicine object specifically for someone carried deep significance in Comanche culture. Sarah continued toward the gathering area where Quanah was overseeing the final organization of their band's departure. As she approached, he broke away from a group of warriors to meet her. "Council decided something important last night," he said without preamble, his expression unreadable. "About you." Sarah felt a flutter of apprehension. Despite her integration into the tribe, her status remained unique, neither captive nor fully Comanche. Has something changed? Had her presence become too complicated as tensions with the army increased? "What decision?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. "You need a Comanche name," Quanah replied, the faintest smile touching his normally stoic features. "Cannot be Sarah Blackwood forever, not who you are now." Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by a wave of emotion she hadn't anticipated. A Comanche name represented the final step in her acceptance, an acknowledgement by the entire tribe that she was truly one of the people. "What name?" she asked softly. "Puha-Tame," Quanah said. "Strong medicine woman." The name resonated through her like a bell struck in perfect pitch. It acknowledged both her gender and her strength, her healing knowledge and her warrior spirit. Unlike her settler name, which tied her to patrilineage and land ownership, this name spoke to her essence, who she had become, rather than who she had been born. "Puha-Tame," she repeated, feeling the syllables shape themselves naturally in her mouth. "I will honor this name." Quanah nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Today you ride as Puha-Tame for the first time. New journey begins." As the band moved out, Sarah, now Puha-Tame, found herself riding near the center rather than at the edges as she once had. Little Feather, her erstwhile language teacher, darted his pony alongside hers occasionally, proudly showing off new riding tricks. Topsana rode nearby, the two women exchanging glances that contained entire conversations developed over months of shared experience. They followed a route that would eventually take them south of the territory where Sarah's homestead had stood. She wondered briefly what remained of it, whether nature had already begun reclaiming the charred timbers, whether new grass grew where her garden had been. The legal documents secured during the raid ensured the land remained hers, a legacy she could someday pass on to children yet unborn. But ownership now meant something different than it once had. The Comanche understood stewardship rather than possession, temporary use of land that belonged ultimately to itself rather than to human occupants. Sarah had come to embrace this perspective, seeing her homestead not as personal property, but as a place where histories intersected, where futures might yet be forged. As they created a rise that offered views across vast stretches of Comancheria, Quanah brought his horse alongside hers. For a time, they rode in companionable silence, each lost in private thoughts, while their mounts maintained the steady pace of long-distance travel. "Scouts report the army building a new fort on Red River," Quanah finally said, his expression grave. "More soldiers are coming, more settlers behind them." Sarah nodded, unsurprised by the news. The winter respite had been temporary, as they all knew it would be. "What will the people do? What we always do," Quanah replied. "Adapt, move, fight when necessary, make peace when possible." He glanced at her. "Your paper for land may be useful someday. Legal claim recognized by white courts." She understood his meaning immediately, as pressure on Comanche territories increased. Having a legitimate white landowner sympathetic to the tribe might prove strategically valuable, perhaps as neutral ground for negotiations, perhaps as a buffer between military expeditions and hunting territories. "The land is yours to use as needed," she said firmly. "As am I." Quana acknowledged this with a slight inclination of his head. "Your path with people not an easy one," he observed. "Many challenges still come. The army never forgets white women who ride with Comanche." "I know the risks," Sarah replied calmly. "I chose them when I chose this life." The chief studied her face, noting the quiet certainty there, so different from the desperate, traumatized woman they had first encountered. Watching her home burn, "Puha Tahme suits you," he said finally. "Medicine strong enough to heal both sides of a divided heart." The observation was unexpectedly personal, coming from Quana, who rarely spoke of inner matters. Sarah recognized in it a reflection of his own experience, the son of a Comanche chief and a white captive, forever bridging worlds divided by blood and history. "As it suits you," she replied softly. They rode on as the sun climbed higher, casting their shadows on land that had sustained the Comanche for generations. Land now threatened by the inexorable advance of a different vision for the future. What that future held for the people, for Quana's leadership, for Sarah's adopted identity, remained uncertain. But uncertainty had been Sarah's companion since the day Wade's men had forced her to watch her home burn. She had learned to embrace it, to find opportunity in chaos, strength in adaptation. The woman who had once defined herself by the boundaries of a small homestead now measured her life against the endless horizon of Comancheria. As the band descended into a valley carpeted with blue bonnets and Indian paintbrush, Sarah Puhatame felt the bone pendant warm against her skin, a tangible reminder of her transformation. Behind her lay ashes and endings. Before her stretched a path of her own choosing, difficult, dangerous, but authentically hers. The woman who had been left to die had not merely survived. She had become a bridge between worlds that desperately needed connection rather than conflict. Whether that bridge would stand against the coming storms remained to be seen, but today, under a vast Texas sky, riding with the people who had become her family, Puha Tame, strong medicine woman, faced the future unafraid. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.